first time Congress has tried to take away our hard-earned benefits. But we have defeated attempts to cut federal benefits before, and we will defeat the change CPI. As the government shutdown lingers and we inch closer and closer to the debt limit, we recognize this is a busy time for Congress and the members here with us today. But as our leaders in Congress debate yet another grand bargain, we are here to reiterate that no deal should come at the expense of our nation's seniors and the most vulnerable. Unfortunately, for 800,000 people in our country right now, their first concern isn't whether or not their annuity is going to be reduced at some point in the future. They're worried about how they're going to pay their rent and feed their kids tomorrow without a paycheck. There's a troubling theme shared by both the shutdown and the chain CPI. The general disregard for the well-being of the men and women who serve our country must stop. While we continue to urge Congress to end the government shutdown and maintain the full faith and credit of the United States, we are here to remind them not to use today's threats to accept misguided policy proposals that will harm seniors, federal employees, veterans, and Americans with disabilities later on. And with that in mind, I wish to welcome NARFE National Secretary Elaine Hughes.
Thank you, Jessica, and good afternoon, everyone. As I recall, when the change CPI was first discussed, supporters described it as nothing more than a technical improvement. I believe I even heard someone say change CPI amounts to simply flipping a few more coupons. A few more coupons is definitely an understatement, as you can see here. Let's talk about reality. The change CPI would not be just a technical improvement for the senior on Social Security who has to choose between buying food and buying medicine when her check no longer meets her needs. It would not be an improvement for the middle-class federal retiree who spent 3 decades serving our country and now in retirement has to tighten his belt because of unexpected cuts to his annuity. Please understand the harsh reality of what the chained CPI would mean for our seniors and the citizens who need it the most. You don't simply adjust to a loss of thousands of dollars. It will require sacrifices. Let me give you a few significant statistics. Under the chained CPI, the average federal retiree would lose $48,000 over 25 years. Do you know how long it takes to clip $48,000 worth of coupons? Do you know how many shoe boxes it takes to store $48,000 worth of coupons? Well, you're looking at it right here and now. For seniors who rely on the average Social Security benefit of $15,000 a year, the chain CPI would cost them $23,000. The chain CPI would, on average, rob retired military members of $42,000. The coupons you see here were sent by NARFE members from all 50 states who are rightfully concerned about the benefits we were promised. The response, as you can see, was overwhelming. We received more than $200,000 worth of coupons from thousands of our members, both active and retired federal employees. Please know that many of our seniors already clip coupons. They search for the lowest cost and they try to get the best deals possible. The notion that we could simply clip a few more coupons to make up for the thousands of dollars lost under the chain CPI is a dangerous distortion of the truth and an attempt to hide the truth. We will not be fooled by the wolf in sheep's clothing known as the chained CPI. You cannot pull the wool over our eyes and convince us that a little fuzzy math in the name of deficit reduction will be painless. We've seen this act before. We've earned our retirement. We will protect our retirement. I urge Congress to oppose the chained CPI. And with that, I would like to welcome Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky.
I'm going to do this too. Thank you. Thank you. I want to thank NARFE, the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare, the Military Officers Association, and the American Foreign Service Association. And I want to recognize the leadership of my colleagues, Senator Sanders and Representative Cummings, in standing up for Social Security and all who depend on it. The 57 million Americans are counting on us to make sure it remains strong and that benefits aren't cut. Social Security works. It's a national treasure that provides benefits to children and students, families, veterans, and retirees. And in some ways, we take Social Security for granted because for generations, Social Security has done its job, provided guaranteed inflation-adjusted benefits to millions of Americans, and has never missed a check. It is only at times like these, when the House Republican majority is threatening the full faith and credit of the United States, that there actually is any question about missing a payment. Growing numbers of Americans rely on their Social Security earned benefits to survive. Not getting their Social Security check means the difference between being able to buy groceries or skipping meals, paying the rent or paying for medication, or even having a little extra to help their children and grandchildren. I want to recognize Sandy Gartner, who's here, whose mother is 90 years old, gets $1,000 a month, had to choose between food and medication, and as a result couldn't afford her glaucoma medication and actually ended up losing sight in one eye. Is that right, Sandy? As a co-chair of the House Democratic Task Force on Senior Issues, I wanted to focus today just on the older Americans. Despite what you may have heard by some, seniors are not rolling in dough. There are not a lot of millionaires, and in fact, only 5% of seniors have incomes over $89,000 a year. The majority of seniors are already financially insecure. 25% live on less than $14,000 a year, 50% on less than $22,500 a year, and 2/3 of all retirees rely on Social Security for a majority of their income. They need every single dollar that they have earned in Social Security benefits. And while the cuts may seem modest, this is a word we hear a lot, modest cuts to those with six-figure incomes, but to retirees who are struggling month to month, cutting the cost of living adjustment or enacting the chained CPI would be nothing less than disastrous. The chain CPI cuts start small, but even small losses are a problem for a senior whose benefit doesn't last through the month already. And the chain CPI benefit cuts continue to grow over the years, costing tens of thousands of dollars over time. So I'm looking at this pile of discount coupons that one senior would have to clip in order to make up for the impacts of the chain CPI cuts. And I have a lot of questions about that. Like, why? In this great nation, the wealthiest nation in the history of our world, we would force seniors to spend their golden years hunting for grocery store coupons in order to pay for food. Or why we need to cut benefits when Social Security doesn't contribute one single penny to the deficit. Or why we don't just scrap the cap to meet Social Security's 75-year solvency requirements instead of causing harm to our parents and our grandparents. Or why we don't use a more accurate inflation measure, one that reflects actual expenses instead of the chained CPI, which is even more inaccurate than the current formula, because a more accurate measure would actually raise the cost of living adjustment for our seniors. Or why we need to cause harm to all those whose well-being depends every day on Social Security, instead of asking those who can afford a little bit more, those wealthy Americans, to do so. I wish we were here today to talk about ways to improve Social Security benefits. We should be talking about how to credit women for the time they take out of the workforce to be caregivers. At a time when savings and pensions are declining, we should be thinking about how we can increase benefits and provide a more accurate measure of seniors' daily expenses. Instead, we are here to say that while we will continue to push for improvements, we absolutely refuse to go in the wrong direction. We will do whatever we can to stop the chain CPI and to protect the economic security of all those who depend on Social Security's earned benefits. Am I right?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. I would like to thank our congressional champions that are here, Senator Sanders, Congresswoman Schakowsky. They're always here with us. And a big thank you to Elaine Hughes and NARFE for inviting the National Committee to participate today. And Colonel Phil Odom, thank him, and the Military Officers Association of America. And of course, our terrific volunteers. If you see yellow t-shirts, they're National Committee volunteers, and they're here every time we ask them to come up. So thank you all. Thank you so much. I have worked in Washington for a long time, on Capitol Hill for 16 years, at the National Committee for 20 years. I have never seen a bigger disconnect between what Americans want and what's taking place in Washington. Poll after poll shows us that Americans of all ages, all political stripes, oppose cutting Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Sadly, supporters of the chain CPI are ignoring the overwhelming opposition to cutting Social Security benefits. Instead, they'd have you believe that the chain CPI is a minimal change. It's a tweak, a technical change, that all seniors have to do is clip a few more coupons, as if that makes any sense. The reality is, after 3 years of enactment, the chain CPI would cut Social Security benefits for a typical 65-year-old by $130. By age 95, it's $1,400 a year. Most seniors would be hard-pressed to overcome a loss of that much income, especially, keep in mind, the average monthly benefit of a Social Security check, $1,262. Not easy to live on, especially when 40% of Social Security beneficiaries rely on Social Security for 90% of their income. But it's important that members of Congress, all of them, understand that the chain CPI is not limited to Social Security beneficiaries, federal and civilian and military retirees, veterans, taxpayers. The chain CPI would have a dramatic and devastating impact on job growth and the recovery of local businesses in every congressional district, in every state around their country. That's why we at the National Committee put out a report, a new analysis, prepared in consultation with Dean Baker, highly regarded economist, and it shows the impact on local economies in every congressional district. Our report estimates at the end of 2023, just in that 1 year, the economic loss in output for the country is $31 billion. And in that 1 year, a loss of jobs of over 200,000 jobs. Despite that fact, the chain CPI is also bad for seniors, bad for veterans, bad for people with disabilities, bad for small businesses that depend on business from seniors, and bad for Americans who would like to have a job and keep a job. Despite all this harm it would do, we are very concerned, deeply concerned, that the chain CPI is once again emerging as a bargaining chip in negotiations on the debt, on the shutdown of the federal government. So I'm reminded, maybe you remember this, when Vice President Biden debated Congressman Paul Ryan almost a year ago to the day, and he caught the congressman stretching the truth. And you remember what he said? He said, "That's malarkey." That's what we say to the arguments of those responsible for shutting down the federal government. We say what? Malarkey! And that's what we say to members of Congress who approve spending and refuse to pay the bills. What do we say? Malarkey! And that's what we say to those who would use the debt limit to hold our programs that are so important to all Americans, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, hostage. We say what? Malarkey! So I say to the Congress, and I think our champions here would agree with me, stop the malarkey. Stop the malarkey. Pass a continuing resolution that funds the government, raise the debt limit without cutting Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. And now it is my real pleasure and honor to introduce a man who's been a champion for us, for seniors, for all Americans, for many, many years, Senator Bernie Sanders.
Thank you very much, Max. Thank you all for being here and fighting the fight that has to be fought for tens of millions of seniors. And I want to thank all the organizations who helped organize this event. There's not much that I can add to what the other speakers have said. I think they've touched almost all the important points. What I want to do is put this into a little bit different context, and that is to raise some issues that many of my Republican colleagues never, ever talk about. And that is what is going on in the economy and why it is an absolute outrage to go forward with a chain CPI. And almost every American understands what's going on in the economy. And that is that the middle class of this country is disappearing, that millions of people are working longer hours for low wages, that in terms of federal employees, they haven't gotten a raise in the last 3 years, that poverty in America today is the highest that it's ever been in terms of the number of people. 46.5 million people living in poverty. That's one reality. And then there's another reality, is that the wealthiest people in this country are doing phenomenally well. Almost all of the new income generated in the last 3 years goes to the top 1%. Corporate profits are at an all-time high. The gap between the very, very rich and everybody else is getting wider and wider. Now, it seems to me that if senior poverty is increasing, if the middle class is disappearing, you do not balance the budget on the backs of the elderly, the children, the sick, and the poor. It seems to me that when Social Security, in fact, has a $2.7 trillion surplus and can pay out every benefit owed to every eligible American, you don't cut Social Security. You figure out a way that we make it stronger and we keep it vibrant for the next 75 years. Now, I want to just make an additional point. And now I speak as the chairman of the Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs. Others have told you the devastating impact that the CPI would have on seniors who are on Social Security, on people with disability. Let me touch on what the CPI does to disabled vets. And that is a disabled veteran who started receiving disability benefits from the VA at age 30 would see his or her benefits cut by more than $1,400 a year at age 45, $2,300 a year at age 55, and $3,200 a year at age 65. Is that the way we say thank you to people who have lost arms and legs and their eyesight defending this country? I think not. So we are here to say very clearly that we are not at a time when the middle class is already hurting. When people today, millions of people, are struggling to pay their bills and buy their food, we are not going to cut the programs that disabled vets depend upon and that millions of seniors and people with disabilities depend upon. Quite the contrary. What we know as the solution to the Social Security issue is you scrap the cap. That's what you do. And what you do is what Barack Obama proposed when he first ran for president in the year 2008. Right now, all of you know, somebody makes $100 million a year, somebody makes $113,000 a year. Both of those people are contributing the same amount in terms of Social Security taxes. You lift that cap, you can do as Obama suggested in 2008. You can even start, not at 113, start at 250,000. You do that, Social Security is safe for the next 50 to 75 years. So let us stand together, not only in defending Social Security, not only fighting to make it, as Jan Schakowsky just said, stronger, not weaker, but let us continue the fight for social justice in this country. And what I find personally appalling, I speak only for myself, is that you have people like the Koch brothers who are worth $70 billion, who have a retirement plan beyond belief, who have more money than the human mind can imagine. That these people are spending hundreds of millions of dollars to cut benefits for disabled vets and low-income senior citizens. They must not be allowed to prevail. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Cummings is not with us right at the moment, but I'll take his place. I'm Phil Odom. I'm a retired colonel in the Air Force. I work for the Military Officers Association and work with NARFE and others here, and we are opposed to the change CPI. In fact, the association adamantly opposes the adoption of the change CPI for the calculation of federal cost of living adjustments. We find the title misleading, as the change CPI is often portrayed as a technical adjustment, and I believe the Congresswoman used that term, to the current formula and that is currently employed by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. In our estimation, change CPI is an insidious, radical change that should be called out for what it really is. It's a cut. It's a cut in the budget. Retired veterans who are disabled, as Senator Sanders pointed out, as a result of the service to our nation, will be severely impacted by the change CPI. And it would clobber military retirees and veterans as well by reducing the retired pay earned by years of arduous service of members who do retire, their VA disability pay acquired by wounds and injury in combat, and their Social Security annuity. So in our estimation, it's a triple whammy on the military. It's unwarranted, and we don't want it to be adopted. For those who have sacrificed so much already, such a reduction in earned benefits is simply unacceptable to the military community and should not be considered by Congress. Thanks for listening to our position, and my colleague, Mr. Silverman from the Foreign Service, will join us with a statement as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you. I'm Bob Silverman, the president of the American Foreign Service Association, representing the men and women of our diplomatic corps serving alongside our military in places like Afghanistan, Iraq, serving in embassies in places like Yemen and Cairo and Libya. And we are all concerned about this chain CPI proposal. So I'm here today to ask our members of Congress and the White House to preserve the cost of living adjustment for federal annuities and Social Security benefits. This change CPI proposal, as you have just heard, is not a technical adjustment. It would reduce both pensions and Social Security and also would raise taxes on the poor. So the change CPI is representing a major increase for our Foreign Service folks overseas and here at home. About 40 million Americans are kept out of poverty by Social Security. Reducing their benefits would impose a real hardship, particularly on the oldest, the poorest, and the disabled. Change CPI would also increase taxes. The tax liability would increase by 14.5% for incomes between $10,000 and $20,000. It would increase tax liability by 3.5% for incomes between $20,000 and $30,000. And it would increase all of 0.1% of incomes over $1 million. Friends, that does not seem like a shared sacrifice. I urge all of us to work together to protect the hard-earned benefits of federal employees, military retirees, and Social Security beneficiaries by opposing this Change CPI proposal. And now let me turn back to Elaine. Thank you.
We will entertain some questions if anybody has any comments or questions. Yes. Okay. Yes, ma'am. Come.
But proponents of Change CPI say it's one of the few ways that revenues can be on the table in budget negotiations that aren't a direct tax increase that Republicans would reject out of hand. What's your response to that?
Social Security should be completely off the table in budget negotiations. If it weren't for the Social Security Trust Fund, which is about $2.7 trillion right now, we would see that our deficit and our debt are much higher. So while I think all of us would entertain a conversation about how to make sure Social Security is solvent for years to come, decades to come, it should not be at all a part of these budget negotiations. That is not a legitimate source of revenue because it is not a source of deficit. I think we're representing the voice of the American people that any cut in Social Security benefits is not going to be accepted or tolerated. And two, again, that if there's going to be a conversation about Social Security, it should be completely separate from this budget negotiation, wherever the suggestion comes from. I actually have had a conversation directly with the president about it, and I'm hopeful that at the end of the day that will not be part of his offering on the table. And let's be clear, the president has said he is not going to be part of any negotiation without serious revenue on the table. So far, we have not seen that at all from the Republicans.
Any other questions?
Can you talk a little bit about the impact on federal employees? If the way the COLA works now is how, and what would the change be? Is there any change that should happen, or are you saying just keep the status quo? Because if you don't like the change CPI, is there another change that can happen, whether it doesn't necessarily have to be a cut?
Yeah. I think we were suggesting it stay the same, but I'm going to turn it over to Jessica.
Thank you, and thanks for that, Jason. Right now, Social Security, the COLA for Social Security military retirees is the same for federal employees, particularly those under CSRS. If you are under FERS and the COLA is over 3%, your FERS COLA is in fact smaller. Right now, we are in a situation where our leaders in this country want to decrease the benefits for Social Security, military retirees, federal retirees, etc. A great alternative would be, as the Congresswoman mentioned in her speech, the CPI, which actually measures the buying habits of those over the age of 62 in this country. The current formula, the CPI-W, doesn't even accurately reflect how seniors spend their money. The chain CPI only exacerbates that problem. The CPI-E would measure the spending habits of seniors in our country over the age of 62 and would be a much better measure of the cost of living adjustment for those groups. There is widespread support in both houses of Congress. There has been resolutions introduced to use the CPI. As the Congresswoman mentioned, this would be a proposal that would in fact increase the COLAs every single year, and therefore not a big part of the conversation these days. Yeah, absolutely.
On the CPIE, it in fact has been used, but only as an experimental program and never actually applied by the Bureau of Labor Statistics for quite a few years. So we know that there's an increase in the COLA if this more accurate, as was just said, accurate measure is used. It needs to be applied, and I think there's growing support in the Congress that recognizes that a change, you're right, a change is needed. But we don't need to take a flawed formula, which is what we have now for measuring the COLA, which understates how inflation impacts seniors, and instead of that flawed formula, adopt an even worse formula, even more flawed formula that will understate the impact of inflation. So that's the wrong direction to go, and there is a better way.
Can I ask a question? You spoke earlier about an overwhelming opposition to this. Do you think that the average American or even the average senior understands what chain CPI even means? You have a couple dozen activists here today with you, but is this an overwhelming opposition?
You know, I have done hundreds of town hall meetings, most of them with members of Congress. During the August recess, I was in Florida with a member, a couple of events in Arizona, in New England with Senator Shaheen, with Tom Harkin in Des Moines. People are getting it. It's taken a while because it sounds a little complicated and esoteric, but people are getting it. And when you explain to them that this proposal means you, a beneficiary, are going to get less money each year, and that it's compounded so that it grows, that shortfall will grow every single year, they're going to get it. And what my hope is the same as Congresswoman Schakowsky, that 16 blocks from here, down the road on Pennsylvania Avenue, they start to get it. Because this is very important to seniors, very important to communities. That's why I hope the press will get copies of the report that we just issued a few days ago, because it's important to people, but it's also important to businesses and communities around the country in every congressional district. So we are doing, as is obvious today, everything we can to make sure that people do understand what's at stake.
Can I say something?
Yep.
I think every member of Congress is well aware of the years where there was no COLA, that the phone calls started coming in from seniors. Where's our cost of living adjustment? Our expenses have still gone up. And if we explain this as a benefit cut, everybody gets it.
But do you think that the Republicans who are supportive of this idea, that this is a political advantage they have in this debate, that chain CPI is a complicated topic?
I don't think so, because I think that the messaging is very simple. If you start talking about this means a cut in your benefits, then people are going to get it. The mechanism will come in the second or third paragraph, I think, and people will understand that this is something that is going to hurt them. So I don't think it's going to be that complicated.
Aside from blocking the CPI, I'd like to know what your thoughts are in regards to halting the general trend since the TARP bailout regarding policies that have been asking the average American to sacrifice their standard of living. As you know, and Sanders made the point to this, that there has been this egregious ratio where the middle class and poor people, let's not forget,
Yes, and that's why so many of us support raising the minimum wage, which is very important, that we have Democrats have a whole economic agenda for women in our economy. When women succeed, America succeeds, dealing with child care, the Paycheck Fairness Act, etc. And that's why we want to be able to move the American Jobs Act. We have an entire agenda that addresses income inequality. Unfortunately, the Republican majority in the House of Representatives continues to support an agenda that increases the income inequality in the United States of America, which has grown. We are at our richest right now. It's important to note, we are at our richest as a country right now if you were to divide it equally among Americans. But unfortunately, what you've seen for the median income for Americans, we've seen flat or downward trend in the income of ordinary Americans. And as Senator Sanders says, we are losing the middle class. People are slipping into poverty. And so our agenda today is to make sure that we don't slip further, that that we don't allow any more of the policies that are going to increase poverty, that are increase struggling of ordinary Americans, and prevent the passage of a chain CPI. Yes, I'm a co-sponsor of that legislation. Okay, I'm going to go.
Okay, we'll take one more question. Yes.
Just for the record, are you aware that the Obama administration hasn't ordered the change in CPI? Are you well aware that they are considering making this shift?
I'm sorry, who?
The Obama administration hasn't ordered the change in CPI.
The president has put it on the table as part of some sort of a grand bargain that would significantly include significant new revenue. So far, we have not heard that from the Republicans. In any case, this coalition and the majority of Americans does not want to see that as part of any budget negotiation, because we think that's a separate conversation, and we're going to continue to organize against including a chain CPI as part of that.
And are you aware, is the administration considering including it in any kind of...
I don't know if in the future that's going to be part of it.
All right, I want to thank everyone for being here. Thank you very much.
No chain CPI, 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 no.